Smart Cerebrum Private Limited is a team of academicians and experts who are into education field since decades. We are proud to be associated with more than 1,500 institutions across the country. We are into academic consultation, teacher training, student training, communicative English, Vedic mathematics, subject-specific training, content development, and many more. Smart Learning is a service-oriented social initiative from Smart Cerebrum Private Limited, wherein subject-specific experts will be conducting online sessions for the student community at large. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for constant updates about upcoming sessions and topics. All the sessions will be related to the syllabus and curriculum.
We welcome Avanthi ma'am and all of our viewers for today's session. As this session is for grade 10 English Grammar Modals Part 1. Please type the queries on our YouTube channel. A very warm welcome to you ma'am. Over to you ma'am.
Thank you, Navya. Hey there, everyone. Avanthi here. And you are watching me live on English grammar classes, courtesy Smart Cerebrum. For the last 2 weeks, we have been having English grammar sessions. I hope you're all really doing well with English grammar. And when I, see the views and likes which I get on this channel, especially on English grammar classes, I feel very encouraged. Thank you so much for that lovely response. So we will start our session for today. So I will stop my video and share my presentation. Okay, here we go. Here is a teacher, and let's read what she has to tell the student. You should have been more attentive. You ought to be more attentive. You must be more attentive. We have 3 sentences here which the teacher is telling her student out of her concern to the student. But all the sentences seem to mean the same. When do we have to use should? When do we have to use ought to? Or when must we actually use must? Okay, probably confusing, right? Well, today I'm just going to discuss just that. And before we begin, let me, extend my acknowledgement to the wonderful work of Smart Cerebrum Private Limited. They're doing this wonderful, a wonderful work wherein they're bringing in passionate teachers and helping students across India with various subjects. So please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share and comment on these videos, and do click on the bell icon if you want to receive your notifications. So let us discuss modal verbs. My session objective, my intention of doing these sessions, probably we will have 2 sessions, we will do it in 2 parts, as by the end of both these sessions, I should have been able to enable you to identify and use modal verbs confidently. Now, this is what I aim at. And in order to achieve this, we will be touching upon 3 milestones. First of all, let us get the concept right. What are modal verbs? Okay, we're going to understand that first. Then we're going to look into the characteristics of modal verbs. And finally, the usage of modal verbs. And just to give you a heads up, we will be doing the first 2 today. What are modal verbs and what are the characteristics of modal verbs? And probably in the part 2 of modal verb sessions, we will be touching upon the usage of modal verbs. We always have to do a quick review of what we already know, because that becomes the basis of learning what lies ahead. And there are some simple things which I'm sure you already know, but nevertheless, let us, brush up some of the facts. You're already aware of what a verb is. So when I ask you a question, what is a verb? What is the immediate answer I get? A verb is an action word. Yes, you're right. A word which talks about action or the state of any noun or subject is a verb. Now, let us look at these examples. Janaki swims in the pool. What is the action word over here? Swims. Yes, swims is the verb because that is the action done by the subject. Now, if you look at the definition, I have also added talks about action or the state of any noun or subject. Now, what is the state of a subject? Now, look at the sentence. Janaki loves to swim. Now, here it talks about her emotional state. What is her emotional state about swimming? She loves to swim. Okay, that's not an action, but it is a state of the subject Janaki. So, this is how you can understand what is a verb. It not only talks about action, but it also talks, sometimes it also talks about the state of any noun or subject. And okay, this is one part. What is a verb? Now, last sessions, when we were doing tenses, we were speaking a lot about helping verbs. So let us quickly recap what are helping verbs. Now, helping verbs are verbs that help the main verb in a sentence by extending its meaning. And they're also called as auxiliary verbs. So if at some places, if I'm saying modal auxiliaries, or if I'm saying modal helping verb, or modal auxiliaries, or they all mean the same. Basically, helping verbs are auxiliary verbs. Now, what are these helping verbs? If you look at this picture, here is a boy who is helping a little girl try to get her cat down. So if I call the girl as the main verb, what is the action of the boy? He is helping. So I'll call him the helping verb. Now helping verbs are exactly the same. They help the main verb. How do they help the main verb? They will help us to understand the meaning of that entire sentence better. For example, if I look at this sentence, Janaki was swimming in the pool. Now, which is our main verb here? Swimming is the main verb. And which is our helping verb? Was. Now, what helped me? How did was help me when I looked at the sentence? When I look at the sentence, how does was help me? I have learned when I did my tenses that was represents a past tense. And when I look at was and a combination of ing, verb first form of verb and its ing form, it shows me that this action was happening continuously in the past. So it is a past continuous tense. Now that is how the helping verb helped me. It helped me to, it extended the meaning of the sentence by telling me at what time and what was the state of the action. Now look at this next example. Janaki had swum in the pool before. Now again here, swum is the main verb and it is in the third form, and had is the helping verb. And I know if I have a combination of had and the third form of a verb, then it must be past perfect. So the action was completed. Now this is how the helping verb is helping me to understand the meaning of the entire sentence. Now these helping verbs, which especially we saw last time, where is, am, are, was, were, and have, has, okay, we basically divide them into two parts. One is called as the primary auxiliaries, which indicates the time of action, which we were using for tenses to identify the tenses. So we saw all this already. Is, am, are, do, does, did, have, has, had. Okay, they are called as primary auxiliaries or primary helping verbs. And what are modal auxiliaries? They show us ideas. So words like can, could, may, might, shall, will, would, should, ought to, must. You may have used these, verbs, and these words are called as modal auxiliaries. They basically give us show an expression or give us the intention, or it is indicating some idea. So if I ask you the question, what are modals? Then you may start saying words, because just now I showed you in the chart. So you may start saying words such as can, should, could, might. These are modals. Yes, these are modals, but these are examples of modals. What are modals? See, the meaning of modal can be understood in the word modal itself. Actually, in Latin, modal means it describes a mood. Something which describes a mood is called as a modal. And what is mood? Mood is an expression or an intention. Expression or intention of what? It is an expression or intention of your mind. Or can I call it as man ki baat? Which means that if a speaker wants to express, say, supposing he wants to express a wish, or he wants to express a desire, or he wants to seek permission, or he wants to give you some advice, it is there in his mind. Okay, it is in his mind that he wants to give you some advice, or he wants to make you understand your responsibility or your ability, then the speaker will use certain words in a sentence, and those words which basically tells the person's wish or desire or permission or possibility or responsibility, those words are called as modals. In the entirety of English language, there are no other words that describe expression or intention other than modals. So if that word is expressing an intention or an expression, then that word is known, that is a modal. Now let us understand this better with an example. Now look at this sentence. You can speak English. What does it mean? It means that you have the ability or the capacity to speak English. Now let us see the next sentence. You should speak English. What does it mean? If you look at the sentences carefully, only can in the first sentence and should in the second sentence is different. I can remove the can and I can remove the should, and you can just read those sentences. You speak English, you speak English. It is the same sentence except that I have introduced two words. One is can and the other one is should. However, in the first sentence, what is in the mind of the speaker? What is his man ki baat? What is his mood? What is the speaker's mood? He wants to tell you that you have the ability or the capacity or the capability to speak English. But in the second sentence, you should speak English. What is in the speaker's mind? He's not talking about your capacity here, but he's in the mood of giving you advice. He's saying you should speak English, probably for reasons like he may have to attend an interview in some multinational company. So probably he is giving advice, you should speak English. And if I remove these two words can and should, the remaining sentences look similar. It is these two words, which one, can and should, these two modal words which gave the true sense of the sentence. It is these words which gave out the man ki baat of the speaker. Now I'm sure that there is no doubt in the concept of modal verbs. Remember, concept is power. So if you have understood this with clarity, that modal verbs talk about, is talking about expressions or intentions. Okay, that is a modal verb. And please be very clear with this concept. With this, we arrive at the definition of a modal verb. Modal verbs are auxiliary verbs. Remember, auxiliary verbs are also called as helping verbs. Modal verbs are auxiliary verbs that provide additional and specific meaning to the main verb of the sentence. It is a verb that cannot work without another verb. So it is always dependent on the main verb. Okay. So in the previous examples, when we see you can speak English, which is the main verb, speak is the main verb. And what is can? Can becomes the modal verb. You should speak English, again, speak is the main verb and should is the modal verb. The only difference is in both the places, in these two different situations, we came to know the mood of the speaker, whether the speaker is trying to talk about your ability or whether the speaker was trying to give you advice. Okay. So with this, we will now be looking into, let us see where it is being used. Where do we use modal verbs? Modal verbs are used to express, just now I told you it is about expression, express the following meanings and intentions by the speaker. Which intentions basically we are talking about is, if the speaker wants to express ability, we already saw that, possibility, permission, obligation, suggestion, sometimes if they want to intend talking about necessity or compulsion, promise or request. Then we have a whole host of modal verbs which is used, and some commonly used modal verbs are would, could, shall, should, can, might, must, need to, used to, will, may, ought to, dare, has to, be able to. So these are some of the modal verbs which are used for such expressions. So now let us learn their characteristics. What are the characteristics of these modal verbs? Do they have any special characters? So we are getting into our second milestone. Let us read the two sentences. I can play guitar, and can I play guitar at the school fest? Can I play the guitar at the school fest? What do we see here? We have used the same modal verb can, is it not? In two different situations. What are the different meanings that can express over here? In the first sentence, I can play guitar. Can works with the main verb play to express an ability or capability that this boy has. What is his ability or capability? He can play the guitar. In the second sentence, can is used with the main verb play to express the fact that she is asking for permission or request to play guitar at the school fest. So what do we see in this? What do we understand from this? Is it not very clear that the same modal verb, which was the modal verb over here, can, the same modal verb can be used to express two different meanings. In the first case, it was giving out the meaning of ability or capability, but whereas in the second sentence, can is giving us the meaning of permission or request. So we arrive at the first characteristic of modal verbs. The same modal verb can be used to express different meanings. Okay. Now let us look at this picture. Now we'll talk about this picture. This is a picture of an old painting. Now I have two sentences over here. Let us look at these two sentences. The painting may be very old. And here is the second sentence. The painting could be very old. We see that two different modal verbs are used. Which are the two different modal verbs used over here? May and could. For the same situation. And what is the situation? We are talking about a old painting. The painting may be very old. The painting could be very old. In the first situation, if you look at the modal verb may, it expresses a good possibility. The painting may be very old. It's a good possibility that it may be very old. Whereas in the second situation, could expresses an extremely weak possibility. The painting could be very old. Now, do you see the difference? So the situation is the same, but we're using two different modals. So what was what can we arrive at then? What characteristic does it speak about this modal? So it says that different modal verbs can be used in the same situation. So you have a particular situation, but you can use different modal verbs. So this is its second characteristic. The second characteristic says that different modal verbs can be used in the same situation. What was our first characteristic? If you can recall, same modal verb can have different meanings. But what does the second characteristic say? Different modal verbs can be used in the same situation. Okay. Now let us look at the next example. Here is a pharmacy and here is a sentence. He can run to the pharmacy. Here, can is the modal verb, and which is the main verb used over here? Run. So, can is working with the main verb run to show what? To show the ability or capability that this boy has. What is his ability or capability? He is able to run. But can we say he can runs to the pharmacy? No, we can never say that. This is a very important point to remember, that the main verb of the sentence will always be in the base form with modal verbs. Okay, so we can never change the form of the base verb, which is the base verb over here, run. So this is a characteristic when we are using modal verbs. Modal verbs are always used only with the base form of the verb and not with the other forms of the verb. So which are the other forms of the verb which we had? Which were the other avatars of the verb which we had? We had, the past tense, and then we had the past participle, we had the ing form, we had the s and es form. No, modal verbs uh, can only be used only with the base form of the verb. So the main verbs are always used in the base form with modal verbs. So this is the third characteristic, that main verbs are always used in the base form with the modal verbs. Now let us just quickly recall our first two characteristics. What was the first one? Same modal verb can give different meanings. Remember the example of the boy with the guitar and the girl with the guitar? Can and can. Okay. Then what is the second characteristic? Remember the picture of the painting? Different modal verbs can be used for the same situation. And what was the third one which we just now discussed? That the main verbs are always used in the base form with the modal verbs. Okay. Now let's go to the fourth one. Seema can sing like a nightingale. Now again, what is can? Can is a modal verb. What is it expressing? Can here expresses the ability or capability of Seema to sing like a nightingale. But can we say Seema sing can like a nightingale? No, we cannot. We cannot use it that way. Remember, always remember that modal verbs generally come after the subject and before the main verb. Now, what has happened here in the second sentence? Where did the modal verb come? It has come after the verb. But look at the first sentence. Which is the subject of the sentence? Seema. And which is the verb? Which is the main verb? Sing. And where is the modal verb can? It has come after the subject Seema and before the verb sing. So before the main verb. So we arrive at the fourth characteristic of modal verbs. Modal verbs are generally used after the subject and before the main verb to express different meanings and intentions. So now I'm going to take you through a quick recap of the first three characteristics. Now you may think this is so much of repetition, but remember, repetition is the mother of memory, and you will never forget this. Even by next class, you will be ready with all of this. So what is the first characteristic of the modal verb? Same modal verb can give different meanings. Remember the example of the boy with the guitar and the girl with the guitar. I can play guitar. Can I play the guitar at the school fest? And what was our second one? Remember the picture of the painting? This painting may be very old. This could be a very old painting. So the usage of may and could. Different modal verbs can be used in the same situation. Then what was our third one? Main verbs are always in the base form when we are using modal verbs. Remember the example of the boy running to the pharmacy. So the main verb will always be in its first form, in its base form. So this is the third one. And what is the fourth one? Seema can sing like a nightingale. Do you recall that? Modal verbs are generally used after the subject and before the main verb to express different meanings and intentions. Okay. Oh, why do we have this picture again? Okay. And we have the same sentence. He can run to the pharmacy. We have read this example earlier. Now let us learn another characteristic of modal verb with the same example. In this sentence, the main verb can tells us of the ability of this boy to run. But I can never say he can run to the pharmacy. Remember that modal verbs do not change forms. So they do not take a S, ED or ING at the end. So we have seen last time when we were doing tenses, how verb changed its forms, right? I told you the different avatars of the verbs. So where we had the first form, the second form, third form, ING form, S form, ES form. But modal verbs cannot change their forms. Okay, they will remain as they are. They have to be used as they are. So this is our fifth characteristic. We can never say he can run to the pharmacy. So in on the same lines, if I say I could run 5 miles in a day, then that sentence is correct. But I cannot be saying I couldn't run 5 miles in a day. Okay, so because modal verbs do not change their form. So this is our fifth characteristic. Modal verbs do not change forms. So they do not take an S, ED or ING at the end. Once again, remember, repetition is the mother of memory. So what is our first characteristic? Same modal verb can give different meaning. And what was our second characteristic? Remember the painting. Different modal verbs can be used for the same situation. Boy running to the pharmacy. Main verbs will always be in the base form when we're using with modal verbs. Then modal verbs are used after the subject. Remember, Seema sings like a nightingale. Seema can sing like a nightingale. Modal verbs are used after the subject and before the main verb. And what was our fifth one? Modal verbs do not change forms, so they do not take an S, ED or ING at the end. Now, let us look into the next characteristic. When I was younger, I could run very fast. Now here, could is expressing an ability in the past. Is it not? So when I was younger, we're talking about something which happened in the past. And what is the modal I've used over here? Could. And it is talking about the ability of my ability in the past. But remember, we can never say, when I was younger, I could to run very fast. Why? Because to is never used after a modal verb. Now look, one more rule we are getting, one more characteristic of a modal verb is we can never use a to after a modal verb but there are exceptions. Exceptions are when you use ought to, able to, need to, that is where these are the exceptions. But otherwise, you cannot use the infinitive form of the verb is never used with modal verbs. So to is never used after the modal verb. So this brings us to the sixth characteristic. And what is it? To is never used after a modal verb. Exceptions are ought to, able to, need to. The infinitive form of the verb is not used. Okay, repetition is the mother of memory. So our first characteristic, same modal verb can have different meanings. Then what is the second one? Different modal verbs can be used for the same situation. I know when I'm reading out this, the picture is coming into your mind. What was our third picture? Boy running to the pharmacy. So what was the characteristic? The main verbs will always be used in its base form. When there are modal verbs, because see, the modal verb will always come before the main verb, and that main verb will always be in the base form. And modal verbs are always used after the subject and before the main verb. Seema can sing like a nightingale. And what was our fifth one? Modal verbs do not change forms. So you cannot add an S, ED or ING at the end. And finally, what was our sixth one? When I was younger, I could run very fast. What did it say? To is never used after a modal verb. So the infinitive form of the verb is not used. What are the exceptions? Ought to, able to, need to. These are some of the exceptions. Okay, now we have here three ladies discussing. Now let us see the sentences. We should first speak to the director. Now, what is the modal verb over here? Should. And what is the main verb over here? Speak is the main verb. And now, if we say, should we first speak to the director? Question mark. What do we understand over here? See, our understanding is with a simple inversion. Okay, with a simple inversion, I can change the sentence into a interrogative sentence. So if we invert the position of should with we, and if we comes in the place of should, then it becomes an interrogative sentence. So this is another simple characteristic of a modal verb. Modals form interrogative sentences by inversion. So how do I form an interrogative sentence? If I'm given a sentence with a modal verb, just invert the, put the modal verb first, and then it becomes an interrogative sentence. If you remember the example of, can I play the guitar at this school fest? Where was the modal verb? It came first, right? So with inversions, I can form interrogative sentence. Modals form interrogative sentences by inversion. So repetition. What is repetition? Repetition is the mother of memory. Same modal verb can give us different meanings. Different modal verbs can be used in the same situation. Main verbs are always used in its base form. I'm sure as I'm telling this, you're recalling the picture or the image which I had shown you. Which is the image that comes into your mind when you see this? It is used after the subject and before the main verb. Yes, Seema can sing like a nightingale. And they do not change forms. What do not change forms? Modal verbs do not change forms. And what was the example for that which we saw? The same example of the boy running to the pharmacy. Okay, they don't change forms. You cannot add an S, ED or ING at the end of modal verbs. And what was our sixth one? Yes, it was the picture of that girl, touching the finishing line. When I was younger, I could run very fast. So infinitive form is never used. Infinitive form of the verb is never used. To is never used in modal verbs. And we just spoke about the seventh one. We should first speak to the director. Should we first speak to the director? Modals form interrogative sentences by inversion. Okay, we have finished 7. We have just 3 more to go. Okay, here is a picture. Students might find math difficult at the beginning. Now, which is the modal verb here? Might. Might here is the modal verb which is expressing the fact that there may be a probability or a possibility that the students might find math difficult at the beginning. We can also say students can find math difficult at the beginning. Both might and can expresses possibility or a probability, is it not? But we can never say students might find math difficult at the beginning. Why is that? Because that is a characteristic of a modal verb. Remember, modal verbs cannot be used with other modal verbs. So we cannot use two modal verbs together. As simple as that. So no two modal verbs can come together. That is our next characteristic. So modal verbs cannot be used with other modal verbs. Yes. Now you know what. What is my next slide? Yes, repetition is the mother of memory. Same modal verb can have different meanings. Different modal verbs can be used in the same situation. The main verb is always used in the base form when we're using modal verbs. And a modal verb is always used after the subject but before the main verb. Modal verbs do not change their form. So no ed, ing, s, you're not supposed to add to modal verbs. And the infinitive form is never used. We never use a to with modal verbs, except there are exceptions. Ought to, need to, those are our exceptions. And how are interrogative sentences formed with modal verbs? Just by inverting. Inversion will help us to make interrogative sentences. And what was the eighth one we just now saw? Of students might find maths difficult at the beginning. Modal verbs cannot be used with other modal verbs. So you cannot use modal verbs together. That was the eighth one. Okay, here is our next picture. The child could lift the heavy bag. Here, could is expressing an ability or capability of the child over here. The child could lift the heavy bag. If we say the child could not lift the heavy bag, could not is also a modal verb, which is expressing what? It is expressing his inability or incapability to lift the bag. So what do we see? We see that negatives are formed by adding not after the modal verb. In this case, not is added after the modal verb to express inability or incapability, and we formed a negative sentence. So very simple. Our next characteristic is the negatives are formed by adding not after the modal verb. So we are finished with the ninth one and we have just one more remaining. So we will again do a quick recap of all the 8 characteristics. Same modal verb can have different meanings. Different modal verbs can be used for the same situation. The main verb is always in its base form. And the modal verbs are used after the subject and before the main verb. Modal verbs do not change forms. And the infinitive form is never used. To is never used. Interrogative sentences are formed just by inversion. Inversion of the modal verb and the subject will give us the interrogative sentence. And what was the 8th one which we had discussed? It cannot be, modal verbs cannot be used with other modal verbs. And we just finished the 9th one which said the negatives are formed by adding not after the modal verb. And we arrive at the last one. So I have 2 sentences here. Now, can and should or any other modal verb for that matter, it is not affected by the number or person of the subject. So when I say, I can play tennis, I can also say, you can play tennis, he can play tennis, she can play tennis, they can play tennis, we can play tennis. Similarly, I should see a doctor, you should see a doctor, he should see a doctor, she should see a doctor, they should see a doctor, we should see a doctor. See, did you notice over here? Whatever the number or person of the subject, the modal verb did not change. So, this is our last characteristic of a modal verb. Modal verbs are not affected by the number or person of the subject. So, this is the last characteristic. So, whatever be the number or person of the subject, that modal verb is not affected, it remains the same. Yes, if you're asking me for a quick recap, yes, I have understood that you know the importance of revising or the importance of repetition. What is the importance of repetition? Repetition is the mother of memory. So, same modal verb, different meanings, can give different meanings. And what was the example which I had given? I can play guitar. Can I play the guitar at the school fest? Then, different modal verbs can be used for the same situation. And what was the example we had discussed? A picture of an old painting. This may be a very old painting, or this could be a very old painting. So we used may as well as could in the situation. The same situation. The painting may be very old, the painting could be very old. Then the main verbs are always used in the base form. So our example was of the boy running to the pharmacy. He can run to the pharmacy, but we can never say he can runs to the pharmacy. You cannot change the base form of the verb. And what was our next example? Seema can sing like a nightingale. And when I interchanged it, Seema sing can like a nightingale. What was wrong? Yes, in the usage of modal verbs are always used after the subject and before the main verb. Then we saw that modal verbs do not change forms. So same example of he can run to the pharmacy, and I said he can run to the pharmacy is wrong, or I couldn't run 5 miles in a day is wrong. Why? Because modal verbs do not change their form. So we cannot add a s, ed or ing. Then we saw the sixth one. Here was that example of the girl touching the finishing line. When I was younger, I could run very fast. That was the example. So when I was younger, I could too run very fast is not correct. Why? Because the infinitive form to is never used with modal verbs. Then, but we had exceptions over there. Ought to, able to, these were need to, these were our exceptions. Then how did we form interrogative sentences? Just by inversion. So what was the example? The example of three pretty ladies sitting and discussing. We should first speak to the director. Should we first speak to the director? So there was a simple interchanging of we and should. Then what was our eighth characteristic? We cannot use modal verbs with other modal verbs. So I had given you the example of the student and mathematics. Students might find math difficult at the beginning. Students can find the math difficult at the beginning. We can have two different modals almost giving us the same meaning, but I cannot use both of them together. I can never say students might find math difficult at the beginning. Then we had the picture of the boy lifting a heavy bag. The child could lift the heavy bag. The child could not lift the heavy bag. We just form the negative in a simple way. Negatives are formed by adding not after the modal verb. So that was our ninth one. And what was the 10th one which we just now discussed? Modal verbs are not affected by the number or person of the subject. So that was the 10th characteristic which we had discussed, where we had the example of I can play tennis, you can play tennis, or I should see a doctor, she should see a doctor. So where the number and the person did not matter, the modal verb did not change. Okay. So this is what we learned today. So I won't be repeating again. What did we learn today? Let me just take you once again through the definition, because concept is power. So what is a modal verb? Modal verbs are auxiliary or helping verbs that provide additional and specific meaning to the main verb of the sentence. It is a verb that cannot work without another verb. It basically gives the man ki baat of the speaker. It tells the mood of the speaker and extends the meaning of the verb by giving the mood of the speaker. So this is it, and I will not be going through this once again because I have repeated enough. I'm sure you have already memorized the 10 characteristics of modal verbs. Yes. So see you in the next class. Of course, we have probably finished 15 minutes early, but in the next class, in the next session, we will be talking about the usage of modal verbs, because this would have taken a little extra time and we won't be able to finish in 15 minutes. I decided to put it into the next class. So until next class, stay home, stay safe, follow the protocol given to us by World Health Organization. Wash your hands as often as possible, especially if you're going out. Wear a mask, use sanitizer, maintain that social distance. Have the Arogya Setu app. It will help you to locate as many people who are infected with the coronavirus around you so you can stay safe. So you're the best. Goodbye. And over to Navya.
Thanks a lot, Avanthi ma'am. That was definitely a very creative way of depicting modals. And I'm sure all the students would have learned it much better where to use can, could, and should. And I'm sure they'll be expecting for more from you, as we are seeing a lot of response from the students. So you have to go a very long way with us.
Oh, sure, sure.
Enriching our students with English and English concepts in a joyful manner.
My pleasure, ma'am. My
As
pleasure.
always.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Viewers, stay connected and keep encouraging us by live participation in all the sessions. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you again in the next session.